right, so we're going to kick it off. First of all, I think it's important to acknowledge that the last episode is our first episode. I've never done this kind of thing before. So we sort of just dove into a conversation. It was with me and Alicia Kalar talking about the good old days. And I didn't really preface what this whole podcast was about, what the goals are, and that sort of thing. So I think let's go ahead and just give a brief outline of like what the point of this is before we introduce our guest Juan. So the title of this podcast is People, Passion, and Process, the Art of Science. And the goal is we want to just talk about what science looks like in reality. I think you see a lot of stuff in papers and talks that's sort of the distilled version of the science. It's usually very jargon heavy, very technical, and it's kind of science for scientists. But the point of this podcast is I want to sort of, you know, pull back the curtain and talk about what it looks like to be a scientist, like what your day to day looks like, why you do what you're doing, and a lot of the challenges and sort of like awesome, cathartic, wonderful experiences that happen with science, and also some of the challenges, because I think a lot of people getting into science don't understand that. The general audience doesn't really understand what scientists are actually doing. Um, so that's the point of this podcast. And so without further ado, I'd like to introduce my grad student Juan. Juan, why don't
Hey,
you introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about your background, um, and like why you're here.
all right. It's a pleasure to be here, and thanks for inviting me. Um, I'm Juan. I'm from Colombia, and I had the pleasure to be your first grad student and start a lab from the ground up. And yeah, we just got our first paper published earlier this week, and it was a milestone for the lab and personally as well. Um, well, a bit of background. I grew up in beautiful Manizales, coffee region in Colombia, and
You were just
I
home,
didn't.
right?
Yeah,
You
I,
just got to
I
go
I just came
home.
back from home. Yeah, I was there for 2 weeks, and I had a good time with family.
We submitted all our papers, and then Juan went on vacation. It was pretty ideal.
Yeah, it was good timing.
Mhm.
I grew up there. I went to college there. I'm a physics engineer. Then I did a master's in physics as well, and now I'm doing a PhD in engineering under your supervision
At Dartmouth.
and at Dartmouth. Yeah, and yeah, that's pretty awesome, and I'm really glad to be here.
Hmm. Yeah, so
Yeah,
I guess maybe we can just quickly go in the backstory of how we ended up working together, right? So I
yeah,
was starting a lab. Um, there's a lot a lot that goes into starting a lab, but I started at Dartmouth in July of 2022. Um, and pretty quickly, it was an awkward timing because admissions usually starts in the fall, so it's kind of an off cycle. And I remember, yeah, you basically just reached out to me on LinkedIn.
yeah,
Did I have a post to something that I was hiring? I forget
yeah.
exactly.
You had a post, and then I just sent an
The
email.
Yeah, and you got connected through somebody. When I was an undergrad, I worked in a lab. Marcus Regal's lab was at Georgetown. Now he's at UPenn, or sorry, Penn State. A postdoc, also named Juan, also from Manizales, or
No,
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 he
he's
is from
from Medellin. Yeah,
Medellin. Um, Great guy. He's now a professor, I think, at ETH. So there was a
yeah.
mutual connection, which is how I think you even saw the post. And then you reached out and we chatted, and I was like, oh, I gotta hire this guy. He seems really smart. He seems motivated, and you came like in the dead of winter. Uh,
Yeah,
so new for those of you that don't know, New Hampshire gets pretty cold. Um, you hadn't seen snow.
never. Yeah, it was my first time.
And luckily you like snow, right?
Yeah, I like snow better than summer. I don't like
Hmm.
hot weather. Yeah, but
Yeah, so you
it was
came
really
and I
funny.
I was really struck by like how quickly you picked up on stuff, which was exactly what I wanted out of my first student, is somebody that could learn quickly and start helping out in the lab. And when you first arrived, we had nothing really. Like the
Nothing.
lab wasn't even built out.
Yeah, there wasn't even walls in the lab. There was not even a screw.
Yeah, it was a
Like
big concrete
there's
shell.
yeah,
And we
it
borrowed
was
some lab space from Will Scheidler and Jifeng, where we put some of the
a box.
instruments. Yeah, the quantum
So
machines box, which is basically a tool to send signals and measure them. Um, and then yeah, we were just playing around with cavities, I think. Well, the original plan was to try to extend some of this hyperbolic lattice stuff that I did in my PhD. So I used to work with big arrays of cavities, which are basically analogs for how materials work, but instead of electrons, we're dealing with photons. So I think we were excited about these 3D microwave cavities because, well, you can measure them and you don't need a fridge. Like we didn't even have a fridge at the time, right?
yeah,
But then even
well,
that, like those first cavities were terrible.
we didn't know how to couple them,
Yeah.
which is how this
We didn't
project
have the
started actually. Yeah,
simulation tools or anything. And we wanted to explore different ways to couple these oscillators together to see like collective behavior, right? So
yeah.
then, yeah, now this feels like ancient history, but it was pretty silly. Um, do you remember when we started? Well, maybe you could tell them a little bit about the first time we kind of got them to interact.
As in like
We
when we
had like the
first met.
hole between them.
Oh, when we got the cavities to interact. Oh
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So we had this dual cavity set up where we had a direct hole in between where they could just share photons, but we didn't have any sort of control over that hopping.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a serendipity where we just started to, oh, what if we just take them apart and
Mm-hmm.
start connecting them with wires? And we're
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, well, wires are lossy. We need to overcome dissipation. How do we do that? Well, what about we try to amplify hopping?
Mm-hmm.
Why don't we bring an amplifier? So we just put an amplifier in there to amplify hopping. And then we're like, oh, what if we just do that both ways?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and we just discovered that this system is dynamically unstable. And amplifiers saturate. They cannot just amplify forever.
Mm-hmm.
And then we wanted to recover this sort of symmetrical hopping that we had originally with the direct hole in between. And then that's where we bring the device, the phase shifter, to
Mm-hmm. Well, so let's
mess
back
with
up
the
for a sec
phase. Yeah.
because maybe there's some context here. So
Oh yeah.
normally in physics, one of the big things, well, a lot of physics is just symmetries. Somebody once told me all physics is symmetry and a little bit of topology now. So
Yeah.
for those of you that haven't studied physics deeply, what do you mean by symmetry? Symmetry is sort of a measure of things that stay the same when you do an operation to them. So one of the things that's pretty important in physics is you have time reversal symmetry. So the laws of physics work equally well forward and backward in time. Let's not get into like what sets the direction of time. That's all has to do with thermodynamics and entropy and things like that. But more or less, like you look at a pool table and you like hit the balls and they all bounce around. That video looks just fine if you sort of reverse the direction, assuming you don't see like the person hitting the pool ball.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so then in these cavities, like in normal circumstances, and you take two harmonic oscillators of any kind, you try to make them interact. The classic one we deal with in physics classes is like masses on a spring, which is kind of like, in a car, you have the suspension and you go over a bump and the car kind of bounces up and down. That's like one mass spring oscillator. Now, when you try to say put a two of these oscillators together and couple them with the spring, what ends up happening is um, those two oscillators start to interact, and that interaction causes two modes to show up. One mode is where they oscillate together, and one mode is where they oscillate totally out of phase. And so that interaction, like the way that those oscillators exchange energy, is always symmetric in most physics scenarios. And the reason for that is this time reversal symmetry. Like imagine one photon in one cavity. If it decides it wants to go hang out in the other cavity, the rate at which that happens is the same as the rate at which it can happen in the reverse. That's what we're all pretty well familiar with. And a lot of that extends into all this quantum stuff that we're not really going to talk about quite yet. But so that's normal. And then, so you were getting into the phase shifter. So then this amplifier idea was kind of, well, with wires, they're lossy. So let's compensate for that. And then instead of, most amplifiers kind of work one direction.
But we were also on our quest for nonlinearity. So maybe
Exactly.
we can talk about quartz
Yeah, yeah.
before
That's pretty
that
funny.
that was our first attempt of getting a nonlinearity in the
So why
three
is
microwave
nonlinearity
cavity.
interesting?
Nonlinearity is interesting because it can give you access to dispersive shifts and stuff that we don't have access in linear dynamics in general.
Mm-hmm.
And nonlinear dynamics is very rich and it has a lot of interesting behaviors that one can always harness as resource for
Mm-hmm.
accessing a lot of different effects, just the synchronization as we're going to talk about
Mm-hmm.
later. But yeah, we were like linear stuff is boring. Like
Yeah.
that's one thing that's
Most of
sort
that's
of a
solved. Most of that's what you learn in undergrad.
yeah,
And
everything linear is sort of boring. So we were looking for
yeah.
non-linearities and we started with quartz.
Yeah, which
trying to
is well,
trying to
the
explore
original
the
goal is like we know that these so everyone well, quartz is a really common mineral, but then also it's used for these little watches as a timekeeping element before all these atomic clocks came out. Um,
it's also piezoelectric.
but yeah, it's piezoelectric and it's also it's nonlinear. So what piezoelectric means is you can put an electric field and it actually like changes the sort of can change how the atoms respond. It's a pretty cool phenomenon. Um, but kind of like we're talking about nonlinearities. Let's go back to that car example of the mass. So a nonlinearity in like a sort of classical mechanical oscillator like that would be that under normal circumstances, you try to jiggle one of those springs and masses. And if you increase the amplitude of that you're like jiggling the thing, the response is linear. Like you double the amplitude of your drive, you double the response. But if you keep going, and part of this project is like we just tried to do crazy stuff. Uh, if you drive the crap out of a spring, like really hard, at some point it will be nonlinear because the spring will just break. Like you'll stretch it far enough that it just doesn't act like a spring anymore. And maybe it'll snap. That's a nonlinear process. And so we were quartz, sort of for those same reasons you're jiggling these atoms. If you drive it hard enough, will be nonlinear. But really, what happened is it was like, well, we didn't have that many options in the lab, and so we were just throwing quartz into these cavities, and it was very ad hoc, and hopefully those days are over, but it was a lot of fun. But it did have another consequence. We could tune cavities with them because the dielectric constant changed and we could
Yeah, it
shift
was
cavities
yeah.
around.
we would load them, and that actually taught me that we could have control over the frequency, which was some
Mm-hmm.
other stuff that we learned how to do systematically
Yeah.
afterwards. But I was also getting familiar with how do microwave modes live in the cavity, and what the
Mm-hmm.
resonance frequency means, and what the dissipation rate is, and like what's the
Mm-hmm.
rate at which photons escape the system. And then we started thinking about, oh, how do we compensate for all of these dissipative detrimental effects? And
Mm-hmm.
that, like, it also, even though it was the very early days, it was really nice to get these fundamentals from this very fresh setup
Yeah.
and having not many like options or resources at that time.
Yeah.
That was important, I think.
Yeah, especially we were using like new instruments to measure things. We were building new cavity. Like I feel like in those days there was a lot of we were trying a lot of new things, but it was hard to like rely on anything. Like, without a good way to measure something, when you make a new thing, you're like, oh, am I just not measuring it properly, or did I make a cavity that's crappy? And so I don't know. Like, what was your experience like with that? I mean, you were learning a lot, but I feel like there's probably frustrations as well. Or you've always had such a
Yeah,
good attitude. I think that's why I appreciate having you around. It's like you're always eager to learn, and I think that's a really important um, attribute of yours. And as part of why we ended up like finishing this thing.
yeah. I
Yeah.
was always seeing like these problems as opportunities to learn,
Mm-hmm.
and that's how I like to see all of these problems, because yeah, learning is always fun, and I don't think one can learn without like going through this process
Mm-hmm.
and overcoming yeah, all of these problems. So of course we didn't have like a good sense of what sort of parameters we were trying to achieve, like what type of calibrations, how do we calibrate stuff, how do we get quantitative about stuff,
Yeah.
because getting like qualitative stuff, it's really really fun at first, but then when you want to get everything dialed in, then you really need to understand how to calibrate everything, and then you
Yeah.
also need to trust your equipment and
Mm-hmm.
all of this. So that was also like um, a really fun process to go through,
Yeah.
and you were always there.
Yeah. So we talked about, okay, let's try to compensate for the loss. And what I mean by that is like photons that leave one of these cavities. Now think with the cavities, think of like putting two mirrors pointed at each other. Now, for the light that's in between those mirrors, it basically will just bounce back and forth forever. That is a very high level version of the cavities that we're talking about. So now you take one of those mirrors and you make it semi-transparent. So give it some probability that the light can leave that cavity and go somewhere else. Now, essentially what we do is we would have the light leave one of the cavities, propagate for a ways, and try to end up in the other one. Now, uh, in the microwave regime where we're operating, it turns out that that propagation is a little bit lossy. So then we said, okay, let's, this is all pretty high level classical stuff. So let's just copy those photons. Now, in quantum systems, you can't do the copying as well. Um, let's copy those and amplify them effectively. So this amplifier takes in one photon and spits out 10 or something, right?
Yeah.
And then we lose some soldiers along the way, but then we should
Oh, then make it
have
grow.
one
Yeah.
photon arrive, or more. And I think the more aspect was fun because these little $100 microwave amplifiers that we bought from mini circuits provided like a lot of gain. And so, do you remember? So let's see, what did we do first? We like first we demonstrated that you could make it a sort of one-way street. So you like put light into
Hmm.
one cavity, amplify it, and it showed up amplified from the other cavity. So that was
Yeah,
like half of the battle. And then we added another sort of backward propagating loop.
yeah,
And
and that
then
ended up creating a closed loop.
exactly.
Um,
But do you
that
remember how quickly did we see the limit cycle?
um, I think it took us a while to get to the limit cycle.
Because so one of the things that was concerning, like in this early example we said where everything is nice and symmetric, um, phase is kind of a difficult concept to understand, but it's like essentially if you have a light wave that's moving it along in time, there's an oscillation, like think about a sinusoidal wave. The phase is sort of a bookkeeping of like where you are along that oscillation. And so when we had these two paths, we knew that if we wanted to recover that symmetric kind of coupling where everything is repeat like hopping from this cavity to the other one and vice versa at the same rate, we knew we had to get the effectively what we're talking about is making the path lengths exactly the same, like everything exactly the same. Now, in
yeah,
reality, that's hard to do. Uh, and so then we added the phase shifter pretty early, I feel like.
yeah,
Um, and then that phase shifter kind of is like the whole thing in this.
the
Uh,
non-reciprocity. Yeah, or not for non-reciprocity.
so then, what
Um,
did the phase give us? Like, what is the sort of like essential thing that this allowed us to do?
the phase allows us to have a have control over this rate at which photons go from one cavity and make it its way back to the other. So we can always recover the symmetric phase if we've got like perfectly constructive interference, but we can also have this scenario with where we can just apply shift so that the two waves interfere destructively, but then can we can still have the saturation from the amplifier and access this
Yeah. Well, so we
exotic
end up with
regime.
like instead of kind of recovering this symmetric case, we can end up with a like the common thing, it's really like positive feedback, right? There's a
Yeah,
lot of ways to think about it that maybe are not super useful for listeners, but that positive feedback, like really what we're talking about is you can set it up so that like as the photons go around the loop, there's more amplification than loss, like both in the cavities, what even we're measuring out of the cavities and all the wires, all that stuff, we have more gain than that total loss. And in that regime, when you have the phase so that you kind of come back and you pick up so that you kind of photons that leave the cavity, you amplify them, and that if they come back at the right phase, that can have a runaway process. And that runaway process led to a limit cycle. And maybe you can talk a little bit about that. Like, what's a limit cycle?
a limit cycle. It's well, the technical description it'll be like a closed trajectory in phase space. But it's actually miraculous that you can access such a thing, and then you get a very specific resonance with a very particular resonance frequency that we found we could tune with this phase knob that we engineered. So this limit cycle is a self-sustained oscillation that doesn't require any pumping. So it's remarkable the thing that you can just have microwave photons just sitting in the cavity. Maybe they come from background radiation or something from the Big Bang, and they just end up sitting there in the cavities at room temperature. and they see the initial conditions so that this dynamical system, when it becomes unstable, it just snap to that closed trajectory in phase space, and that end up just showing as a very sharp transition that you can actually see in my background
Hmm.
for the
That little
listeners, and
vertical line right above
that
his head.
yeah, this little vertical line. Sorry for the people listening to it in Spotify, but if you're on YouTube, you can see this middle line here. That's just the limit cycle that gets triggered or seeded by thermal noise at room temperature, and maybe those photons come from the Big Bang itself. Who knows? And then they ended up
No way
in
to
this
keep
picture
track.
right here. Yeah, they
Yeah,
came
it
from the
was
Big
really
Bang and ended up
amazing.
in here.
Yeah,
And
so
yeah, it's a beautiful thing, and it's tied to nonlinear dynamics. It's a purely nonlinear effect.
yeah, it's really amazing. So the heart is kind of a nice limit cycle, right? So there's nothing that one of the cool things about this limit cycle in particular is like we provided power with the amplifiers, but the frequency that that thing oscillates at is totally governed by other physics. Like most systems, when you send in a drive, like you try to think about the car spring, when you take one of those springs and you try to jiggle it, it mostly jiggles at the frequency you're driving it at. And now there's this concept of resonance that, like, when you hit it just right, and maybe your car suspension is like between the what you have in the car and the car suspension, sometimes you have a nice resonance that you hit the right bump and it drives like a
Oh,
good oscillation.
yeah, that made me think about something that puzzled me when I was an undergrad.
Yeah.
I remember I was taking physics two, which was
Mm-hmm.
waves and oscillations.
Mm-hmm.
Then I remember reading a paper then for yeah, this resonance effect, and then the paper stated that if you were to I'm a musician as well. I like to play guitar and sing, so I'm always fond of all of these waves and how all of these perturbations and pressure end up in your ears and sort of alter
Mm-hmm.
all your senses and stuff. So I remember that this paper mentioned that if you were to pluck a guitar in like an E note or an
Mm-hmm.
A note, if you were to play the sixth string on the fifth fret, that's an A note. That's like 440 hertz. So if you were to pluck that, the resonance of that would make the A string to move just because they share the same frequency without even having to play it. And then I read that and I went to like my house and then I took my guitar and I did that and I literally saw the string moving.
Wow.
And I was like, oh shit. uh,
Yeah.
so that was like my first encounter with this phenomenon of like
Yeah, you get like
resonance.
harmonies for free.
Yeah, so it just starts moving around. And I also learned that that's another mechanism that some insects
Hmm.
use to find mating.
Mm-hmm.
Like I think the antennas of female bugs or something share resonance with the wings of the male. So
Oh,
when a male flies around, it sort of starts moving the antennas of the female bug,
huh.
and that way she will be able to tell between male and female, and that's
Whoa.
all like
So there's some
physics and
subtle
resonance
differences. Yeah.
and
Wow, that's cool.
evolution. So I remember like that paper when I was taking uh, waves physics. That was
That's
like
a
my
very
first encounter
tactile
with rest.
thing.
Yeah,
Yeah, and then we've talked. So I also am a musician. And
yeah.
another version of this, which is a little bit more like rock and roll, is you can take a electric guitar
Oh, the game.
and then
Yeah,
just hold it up to an amplifier that's really loud.
yeah.
And that will form a limit cycle. Essentially, like if you get the spacing right and it's essentially if the amp is cranked up enough, it'll start playing a note. Like you can play guitar by just making a chord shape and then just holding it up. And if you get that phase right, it'll take noise from the amplifier, which I think is probably electrical noise, and then positive feedback it and make a note. And that is basically what we observe. So then that's a lot of what we report in this paper. And then had this wonderful collaboration with Lorenzo Viola's group to help us a lot with the theory. We sort of took all the components. Juan very systematically calibrated everything, and we used a model that was pretty much derived from first principles, and it worked really, really well. Um,
Yeah.
eh, well, so tell them a little bit about this entrainment thing because I think it's really cool, and then we can maybe wrap up.
On entrainment. So if we take this limit cycle, like this self-sustained oscillation, and then we start driving it with a coherent tone, meaning that it's a tone that has a very distinctive frequency, and then we sweep this frequency around it. Um, this limit cycle will snap to the driving tone, and then they will be synchronized over a certain bandwidth. And synchronization, it's another miraculous thing. Like
Mm-hmm.
everything tends to synchronize. We all humans, like every synchronization is a very universal and puzzling
Mm-hmm.
effect. And seeing it in this project was also very, very important. And you end up thinking about like flocks of birds
Mm-hmm.
and people clapping and yeah, it's just beautiful and sort of
Mm-hmm.
throwing those analogies into this project is really nice when we start thinking about this self-sustained oscillation with microwave photons that are sitting just there without the need for a coherent pump. And then you start pumping it, and then you see this very pronounced pulling effect where the two resonances comes they coalesce in a single resonance. But
Mm-hmm.
then that process is really it's a very abrupt snapping of the limit cycles towards the drive.
Mm-hmm.
And then that was really nice. And then before they snap, they also spit out a bunch of higher order harmonics that are really useful for another project that we have in mind.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe we don't discuss that here because it's very technical. But
Yeah.
it provides a lot of resources that we can exploit for a bunch of
Yeah.
different applications.
Yeah, and so I think one of the like high level descriptions of what we did is this new phase tunability is kind of a new thing. What's remarkable is it's not been done before. Uh like we're the first to really have all of this tunability. And I think it gives us access to this new physics. I maybe in our last few minutes, why don't you tell me a little bit? I feel like we had a really good review process. We had some great referees. This is
Yeah,
very rare. Um, for those of you who don't know about like what writing a science paper is, you go through peer review, which is basically they send it to experts in the field that are anonymous, so they can be really, really mean sometimes. That's kind of where you shred people. Um, and uh, yeah, why don't you tell them a little bit about? In this case, it was actually pretty positive. Like I'm looking at the fourth figure where we're talking about this synchronization physics. And one of the reviewers actually suggested something to look at that we now included in this final version that's published. We'll put the link in the description. But I thought that
yeah,
was really nice. That's kind of the best case scenario for peer review, right?
yeah. It was a some of the reviewers provided really important insights into how to better understand the synchronization effect that I was talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of them suggested like, oh, what if you track down the power at the drive peak, and
Mm-hmm.
then if it increases that's also proof for the onset of synchronization.
Mm-hmm.
So we just process the
Which makes
data and
sense, but I mean, it's not. that's where it's like really a synchronization thing because now you
Yeah,
have two signals. One is this self-sustained guy, one is the other tone. And when they merge together, I guess, from
conservation
a
of energy kind of
yeah,
thing.
from an
Yeah,
energy standpoint, it should go up. But at the same time, like if they're totally out of phase, if it's like they're just sitting on top of each other, you're sort of just as likely to have a bunch of interference that like kills the signal. But the
yeah,
fact that we saw it go up, which is what the referee was looking for, is basically saying that those phases, now we talked about phase in the loop of the actual system that we're exploring, but now we're talking about phases of that thing, which is kind of just spontaneously figures out a phase. Like it's more like it
yeah,
finds that limit. We turn on the amplifiers, we don't add any more photons, and it just finds some phase. Phase is kind of like a clock reference. And
yeah,
then we have some external thing where we know the phase. Not only are those coming together, but they're locking in phase, which is kind of like a big part of why lasers are useful, is they have a consistent phase. They're
yeah. And
phase
also
coherent.
for the audience, there, I'm sure most of you will be familiar with metronomes.
Mm,
So there's this experiment where you have a bunch of them sitting on a surface, and uh, then you start, um, yeah, you play with them, and they will
yeah,
start
random
all
starting.
randomly just starting like that, and then all of a sudden they will just fall into synchrony. So a similar effect is happening here, but between the limit cycle and external tone. So it's
Mm-hmm.
the fact that they're synchronized means that they're beating at the same rate, just as the metronomes do
Mm-hmm.
after this spontaneous synchronization process occurs.
Which again only comes from a nonlinearity, like which we talked about in the beginning, and is also like just from a like very human perspective. It's one of the most satisfying phenomena. Like um there's there's a lot of popular science books about it. Like I think Strogatz, did you also read that Strogatz book?
Cats, yeah. I think
So
there's one beautiful thing about this project and is how to take any like all of the components individually, characterize everything individually
yeah.
to understand how the complex system, when everything is connected, behaves as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that was another important lesson that I
Yeah,
think it's remarkable out of this project.
definitely.
And it's how to understand everything individually, and then how all of that becomes into like orchestrates all of the behavior that we see for the entire system,
Yeah.
which is
Well,
like
so
a
why don't you tell
complex
me? I
system.
mean, you've written other papers before you joined our lab, but this is kind of one, it's one of the it's our first, big published result as a lab. So I'm
Yeah,
particularly stoked about that. Um, but why don't you tell me a bit about like, we talked about the process to get the paper out and done, which was a lot of effort. Not just you and I, there, Lorenzo Viola, Michiel, and Vince, like all the folks on the paper were very helpful.
yeah, absolutely.
But how have things changed after this? Like, how do you feel? You know,
Yeah.
what's going on in your head? Like,
Okay.
how does this change how you do science now?
Yeah. Okay. I had experience in computational physics before. I I had the opportunity to do a lot of research in magnetic systems, and we also found some important discoveries that we published in other journals. Um, then I moved into industry, and I was working as a machine learning researcher, where I was also like reading a lot of papers and stuff. And I also had the chance of publishing something in natural language processing.
Hmm,
Um,
big
but
topic
then
now.
big topic now, yeah. But then um, this was my first encounter with something that was experimental, like something that I could build from the ground up, something
Hmm.
that wasn't because previously I joined groups that had expertise that has building up for years.
Hmm.
So I was mostly just doing simulations and known experimental results in platforms that were already established at that point.
Right.
Um, but then, how do I feel about this project now? First, it was just building everything from literally scratch. Uh, Not only the project, but the lab as well.
Yeah.
Um, so that was it's definitely like um, eye-opening and
Hmm.
how to get more confidence
Hmm.
because I was personally I've been always struggling with like being confident, and I
Hmm.
think that um, for I don't know whatever reasons, but um, this project has taught me that if you work hard and if you are naturally curious and if you're always willing to like discover fundamental stuff and be like scientific about all of the stuff that alter your senses, there's stuff that um, that also helped me to trust my intuition better.
Hmm.
So I learned how important intuition is because sometimes you would ask me some stuff and I would just come up with an answer and you'll be like, why? And I don't know. I just, I just feel it. So like this intuition, it's important for like
Hmm.
overcoming barriers that can, um, with systematic studies can help you understand really complex phenomena along the
Hmm.
road. But that initial intuition, it's important. I also learned a lot about creativity, as you said.
Hmm.
This idea was just it literally started from scratch, and I think that
Yeah.
creativity it's really important. It's a simple idea,
Hmm.
and everybody in the field knows microwave cavities and amplifiers and phase shifters and digital attenuators and all of that.
Hmm.
But I think that coming up with a way of connecting them to harness all of these important and novel phenomena, at least in this platform, was really important. So even
Hmm.
though I had experience publishing papers before and studying magnetic systems, for instance,
Hmm.
which was really amazing, and I think that I keep that uh, bond to my heart because
Hmm.
I love magnetic systems and collective phenomena and
Hmm.
phase transitions.
Yeah.
But I could also use all of those concepts to draw a lot of analogies and sort of shape how do I think about these systems and build a strong intuition about
Yeah.
all of the stuff that was happening in the lab, and obviously with your guidance and all of the discussions that we have and like when we started working side by side and we got preliminary observations and that was really fun
Yeah.
and yeah, so this process it's different for multiple reasons, but I would say that it helped me uh, get more confidence
Yeah.
as a person. It was a lot of personal growth as well.
Hmm.
Obviously I learned a lot of technical stuff that I didn't know
Yeah.
when I first got here. And it's all about creativity, intuition, ambition, all of those
Yeah.
skills that you like. We cannot write about that stuff in the paper, but
Yeah.
that's what I appreciate about spaces like this, where you can just talk about all of the stuff that doesn't go in the paper and will
Yeah.
never make it
Yeah.
to a space like that. So
And a lot of it's not very sexy or like, but
it
it's
is not
also
very
where the
sexy, yeah.
real stuff is because, I've been doing this game pretty long, well, not as long as a lot of people, but pretty long time. Um, most of my adult life. And when you go to conferences, when you talk to actual scientists, you have these conversations.
Yeah.
And now, even some people though are trying to hide. They're like not comfortable explaining all the times that they failed or all this stuff that in hindsight was really stupid. I think that's a shame because I think it limits people's access to science. And I think a lot of people that are, in high school or college are sitting around and all they know is that they somebody says, "Oh, you want to do this science? Like, read this paper," and it's it's like super technical, and you have to be very motivated to get past that point. But I think hopefully this podcast helps show you that it's a journey and it's a process. That's the process in in the title. It's
Yeah,
about
it helps.
people, like people seed all the intuition and the creativity. The passion is what keeps you going because there's times where like you've been working hard, it's late at night and you fail. And it's okay to just go home sometimes, like there are times where you want to keep pushing and there's times where you want to go home and hit it fresh the next day. And
Yeah,
then the process, it's like the process is really what you're learning. It's like
it's
how
all
to sort of
technical.
keep
Yeah,
making progress even when you're failing constantly.
yeah. There's a lot of resilience as well. Although
Mm-hmm.
I have always considered myself a very resilient person and
Mm-hmm.
disciplined, but this process has definitely helped on like getting more confidence
Yeah.
and it's a lot of like intuition as well and how to
Yeah.
trust your guts, if you will,
Yeah.
and how to
And
come up
that's
with
the
new
cool thing
stuff.
about
Yeah,
experiments. Like
yeah,
I remember Lorenza came in and was like, we had just when we got everything dialed up so we could just get the limit cycle going and like no drive, just turn on the amps and the thing just like blazing. It it's really fun and it's personally, I'm a little biased because I like to do experiment. It's a hell of a lot cooler to just have nature figure stuff out for you. Like we had to spend a lot of time calibrating that and getting all of the phenomena like well structured and like you spent a lot of time getting all those details right. But frankly, like I don't know, the limit cycles just sort of we weren't necessarily like expecting that. We just
it
had
was
enough
just
gain that
serendipity. Yeah,
like it
we
just
weren't expecting that. Yeah,
we just like holy crap, we're gonna break our measurement set. We got to attenuate this signal because it was huge. It was
yeah,
really bright. Um,
like 30 dB.
yeah, so we're like, oh crap, we're gonna fry our electronics, which is the good
Yeah,
problem to have. That's what positive feedback will do. Um,
yeah,
so anyway, well, yeah, I appreciate you, dude, and I'm really excited to share this work with the world, and see how you grow as a scientist. Every project ends up being different, and you kind of have to keep coming back to this confidence thing because every single project I've been on, there's been a phase where you have those doubts and you start to second guess your own expertise and ability. And I think the more you do it, the more you trust that you'll eventually get a result and you'll eventually get a paper out. If you trust the process, if you are a good science, if you know how to do
yeah,
science, which frankly is just hypothesis, test, generate another hypothesis. It's scientific method you learn in like, I don't know, middle school.
yeah.
That's all research is, but
Curiosity is important, and I
yeah,
also remember our first conference, our first APS.
yeah,
I was so scared.
yep,
We had this 10-minute presentation,
which is
and you were like,
nothing.
yeah. And I was like, oh no,
Yeah,
what if somebody just yells at me? And you're like, no, no, that's not gonna happen. But that was so funny, and I really keep that memory.
yeah,
I appreciate that, and yeah, it's a good process, and I think that there's a lot of personal growth as well, not only growing
for
as a
sure.
scientist, and I think that's the important thing about a PhD.
Yeah.
This is for an audience of people just starting their careers, where I want to speak to those people,
Mm-hmm.
their scientific careers, where they just maybe if you're just looking to learn a lot of technical stuff, well, that's okay. But I think that there's a lot of another part of what making PhDs about, and it's all about personal
Mm-hmm.
growth and how to
For sure.
advocate for yourself and how to make sure that you you take care of yourself and your needs, and you
Yeah.
learn how to listen to yourself and
And
what you need to
sometimes
do
that's
to
like, I
yeah
remember there were times where, you know, I I'm in this sort of other camp now as a PI, principal investigator, like professor, like guiding all of this stuff that personally, I had all these phases where I'm like, oh, am I setting the right direction? It's one thing as a grad student when your advisor says, oh, go do this, go do that. But my imposter syndrome was like, oh, am I making the right decisions about how I teach these students and how I guide them along this project? Because there's a million paths you can take. And so I felt that a lot, especially building a lab. It's really stressful at first, and you're trying to bring in more money, trying to get science out, trying to manage people. There's a lot of new things. And um, frankly, part of the reason I did this job was because I knew it would be harder. It would be very hard to do this, to build a lab, to get to the point we're at now. And this is kind of the beginning. We have more stuff we're doing. I did it for the personal growth because I knew like it is really hard. And a
yeah
PhD is like that. Like I totally agree with you that what's interesting is when you talk to people with PhDs in other disciplines and you cut away the technical crap, which is what we're trying to do. We had a little technical stuff in this, but it was pretty high level, I hope. Leave a comment if you think it was too jargony. But uh it's interesting. You talk to somebody with like a music PhD and you're like, oh, what was the PhD like for you? And they're like, oh, it's really hard at times. Like that middle phase was really tough because in some sense having a lot of freedom is a gift, but it's also a curse. Like you have the flexibility as a certainly in my role, but in your role as well. You get to decide like how to structure your time, and that's awesome. I think people like to not be told what to do all the time, but
yeah
at the same time, like you can get in your head and be like, am I spending my time appropriately? You look at other people that are writing papers and you're like, what do they know that I don't know? And so that personal growth is like why I challenge myself, because I grow as a person. Like I've grown a lot. I like to think over the last few years as a professor that stuff that used to stress me out doesn't stress me out. And I think as a PhD student, on the one hand you're learning this very technical knowledge, but on the other hand you're gaining that confidence, you're gaining the ability. What I remember from my PhD is really what I got out of it is knowing that I can do anything. I just need time and money. Well, not always money, but I need resources and time
yeah
and focus. But like the focus kind of comes for
discipline
free with
yeah
me, that discipline, but you have to have the work ethic, but then, you know, you can pivot to it something else if you put in the right time. And I think that confidence really is like a superpower. Like you can do anything
yeah
within constraints of resources and time. Um,
yeah but
I'm really
that's a good
excited that
mindset
I'm
yeah
gonna miss when you graduate, but it's been a lot of fun. We'll always have these memories screwing
yeah
around with quartz and
and
like
it's
yeah.
also fun to see how the lab uh started to grow, how new members just started to come in,
Mm-hmm.
how are we impacting the lives of them, and how they will impact the lives of others, and that's
Mm-hmm.
just like a ripple that propagates through
Yeah.
space and time, and that's like really powerful. And I think that
Mm-hmm.
building community, talking
Yeah.
to them, humanizing all of the research process, it's really important. And I think that what you're doing with this podcast and being my advisor and cultivating this culture of like um, being confident and creative and all of that those are really important skills that will be important as I grow older and get to other roles in the future.
Yeah.
And yeah, I always keep that with me, and I'll make sure that whoever gets into my company will also get a little
Yeah.
bit of that.
You got to
Yeah,
pay it forward. I benefited from amazing advisors my whole life, really, from my parents on. Like, at some point,
yeah,
I'm going to have my dad on this podcast. So we used to
nice.
do all this stuff. Like, he did a lot of woodworking. That was kind of my first experimental role, was like catching wood on a table saw. Like, you know, like how my dad was really hands-on and still is. And you know, it wasn't until I was an undergrad working in Charlie Marcus's lab where I realized, oh, hey, I have a lot of skills that I actually can use as an experimentalist. Like, some of it's like building stuff. Like, we've been building all these cavities that we're talking about, and a lot of hands-on stuff that you don't think of when you read these papers.
Yeah,
That stuff matters. And everyone has a different skill set, and all that creativity stuff. Like, you have this computational background. I think you harness that in this project. Like, this entrainment stuff. This is, I think, what you're showing is the experimental data, I hope.
yeah, this is
But
experiment.
it's
Yeah,
hard to tell because your numerics, like, we just put everything in there and you ran it. You occupied our clusters for a few nights, I think. But uh
yeah,
everyone has different skills, and just because you don't have the same skill set as somebody else doesn't mean you can't have an impact. And it helps to have more skills and deeper like strength of those skills, but everyone brings something to the table, and like that creativity can come from anywhere. Like,
yeah.
so anyway, all right, I was hoping to have it be a shorter one than last one, so I'm gonna cap it here and we're gonna call it. But thank you for coming on. This is a lot of fun. I'm excited to keep doing this with you at a close level for the next few years, and then see how you grow as a when you go into the real world.
Yeah.
But for now, let's
Thanks
keep
for
having fun and do more science.
thanks for having me, and it was a pleasure to just share my story with the community. And yeah, I hope that everybody will read the paper and feel free
Yes.
to just send feedback or anything.
Yeah.
And yeah,
Sounds good.
yeah, feel free to reach out. And yeah, Fitz Lab is really fun. And if you wanna hang out in Hanover, it's just let us know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a great place. All right. Thanks, Juan. I'll talk to you soon.
All right. Thanks.
All right.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Yeah. Bye.